So welcome everyone to this webinar on organizational generativity and enlightened and the 5 fundamental factors for flourishing. I met Cees Hoogendijk, who's gonna share with all of us his findings on his PhD and his reflections on generativity and his experience in working in organizations. So I met him at the conference, World Appreciative Inquiry conference in South Africa already several years ago. And every 3 years there is a conference that gathers people that are interested in appreciative inquiry.
Que no sé por qué aquí.
Hello, if you don't mind to close your microphones. Yes. And so he's gonna share with us on organizational generative enlightened. He has asked me to write in the chat a few words. If anyone has questions, you can also write them in the chat. And Cees is working in several universities in Holland. At the moment, he lives mostly in Spain. He's learning Spanish, and he's writing his PhD on generativity, and we are going to hear about his findings. So the floor is yours, Cees.
Thank you very much, Miriam. So yes, it's an honor to have you as an audience, that you came to listen to what I think is still a very tiny corner of what we call organization development, a word that isn't being in use so much. Maybe it's rising star, we don't know yet, and maybe I can help. If it would be a lean or an agile or a scrum meeting, it would maybe has another effect. But so it's good that you are a selective group of people, and actually it's very fresh what I'm going to share with you. I don't spoke so much yet about it. It's also fresh for me. I'm in the middle of a PhD, and but since I love the dialogue and sharing, and that we learn together, I think this is the perfect moment to present some intermediate results and ideas. So already said more or less who am I? That was my first line on my notes. Who am I? And I always say there's, when you reach 60 years of age, then there's so much to tell that I say, okay, who am I? That is, what you see is what you get. So today, for the next 40 minutes, this is me. And sometimes I update my LinkedIn profile or my website, and then you can find me. And there will probably an email address or something shared. So if there are any questions coming up, also probably after this webinar, then I'll be happy to answer them. So what's the idea for today? To share my ideas and thoughts, to give you intermediate results. Actually, and this is sort of being a label for me, to give you food for confusion. Yes, food for confusion. And that's sometimes what I do. So if you feel confused during this webinar, I think I'm reaching my goal. If you think this is completely clear, then I think we have to speak again. So I'm trying, I have a sort of little chapters to go step by step through this, what I have been working on for the past 2 years. So it is in me in all the details, and now it comes to you as a sort of a waterfall. So I try to bring in some moments of reflection, and Miriam has brought a little gong to enter those, let's say, 30 seconds in between the chapters. Let me start with something where we need a gong afterwards. How coherent are we? Actually, I'm testing my beautiful audience a little bit, whether we sort of made for each other. How coherent am I? Are you? So, are you always aware of your own awareness? Are you aware? Ah, I hear a gong, I hear a gong. Are you always aware of your own awareness? And another question. Do you sometimes think about the way you think? Does it happen sometimes? Do you think about the way you think? Or maybe it's a little bit easier or closer to home. Do you sometimes, if you have children or your little nephews over the floor in your house and they make a lot of noise, do you sometimes, you can't hold yourself and do you shout at them, be quiet? Do you do that? That is not very consistent and not very coherent. To shout, be quiet. You better whisper, be quiet, and they will understand better. Why am I sharing this? Because I started an academic literature review on generativity. And first of all, I am not an academic, I am a practitioner. I worked for 35 years in organizations, and I just recently, from the last few years, I starting to teach or giving lectures about it. So I come from practice. So I started this academic literature review, and I'll come to that later in some more detail. And I found out that my research process itself, searching for the meaning of generativity, became a generative process. So I was in it myself. So, and that is something, because you hope to stay outside and look at it, and that is what the academic practice demands of you. Can you just be objective? No, my dear people, impossible, especially because I started to study generativity. So, and probably that had to do more with my own worldview than my academic skills. So my question is, are you ready for the ride? And I promised you a little longer spaces between my paragraphs than maybe is usual. And this is quite a challenge for me as well. Here's the next question I bring in. Why did I study generativity? Some answers are easy. Since I'm working as a practitioner in organization development, or as a manager in human resources, or as a change manager, I always have followed my mission called Humanization of Organization. For me, an organization is a social entity, and it works well when people feel well. It is actually so easily said, but so hard to achieve. But this is my mission, Humanization of Organization. At some point in my career, I think it was about more than 10 years ago now, the practice of appreciative inquiry crossed my path, and I embraced it fully, and it embraced me. I think this is a great extension of my mission, and it's actually a great practice to be in organizations, to change or to help organizations develop. So appreciative inquiry was in my system, and appreciative inquiry, there's, if you know about it, and you must know about it, you must heard about it by one of your relationship with Miriam, that it has something with it, what we call life giving. So it's already great that an organization is alive, but it's even more beautiful that it's life giving, that it creates life. And that is maybe what these beautiful words at the moment are saying when we talk about thriving organizations, flourishing organizations. So when these words came up, I thought, okay, so my explanation of humanization of organizations actually that I want to help organizations to become flourishing. That's what I hope. So that's why I'm studying generativity, because generativity is a sort of word that came to me, you know, sometimes they fall out of the air. And it also has something to do with life giving. Then there's more to it. There's a debate, there's quite a debate coming up even with the famous change management professor John Kotter, who's sort of comparing two words, surviving and thriving. And he's writing a paper on it and he says, okay, we human beings, because first of all, we sometimes we think that we can talk about surviving organization or thriving organizations or healthy organizations, but actually this is a little bit incorrect. But we can talk about surviving people, thriving people, healthy people. That this surviving may not be enough. It's beautiful, of course, in times of Corona that you survive, that you stay alive. But thriving is keeping up, is going through the motion, is staying and growing through times of uncertainty and complexity. So that was also for triggering me. So if we are talking about surviving and thriving and this beautiful word of resilience, then I love the word resilience, but I think resilience is connected to survival. And what is then connected to thriving? I think maybe the word generativity is connected to thriving. So maybe, you know, this is what academics do. They try to find a niche. So do I have something? Question mark. The answer will be shown in a few years, I hope. There's even more to it. Why I study generativity? I love complexity. Not that I love complexity, but I feel okay in organizations, and I think organizations are complex. Society is complex. I love emergence. Emergence is beautiful. That is like ideas come up on another level than they are created. I love the Kinevin model from David Snowden, which gives a clue about looking at the world, the organizational world, whether it is a simple thing or a complicated thing or a complex thing or even a chaotic thing, and how to handle that. I love that, and I see that it could be very valuable when managers and people that are professionals in organizations also see that maybe sometimes they approach complex problems like they were complicated. They approach complicated problems like they were simple. So when you go to change management literature, and I think every day a new management book comes up, there is so many advices, so many interventions to do, but so little, so few moments that these books ask you, do you have the capabilities to do this? You have to do a change interventions like this, having a dialogue like, what kind of suggestion? Have a dialogue, create emergence, handle complexity. I think it's nice if you already grab it with your mind, but what do you actually do to cope with emergence? And that is my question, what does it need? What kind of quality does it need in you, in the professional, in the organization as a whole? So all these things made me study generativity, and it's my hope and intentions to really find better ways of organizational development. This needs a little ding dong and 30 seconds of processing. And maybe questions come up, and then you're very welcome. Actually, I don't hear the gong, but okay. So we are co-creating this webinar. So yes, I put in a lot of input, but please, I'm not forgetting you all there at the other side of the screen. Checking the time. I like to bring you to a little bit, give an idea, what did I do? And not too academic, but how does such a research look like? Then I go into results. I really want to elaborate a little bit on my results, because these are the 5 factors of flourishing, and we can't stop with this webinar without having shared the 5 factors, and how to bring them to practice, and then my end note will come. So let's find out how we can manage the time together. What did I do? Let me start with a quote from the wise sage Confucius. Confucius, the Chinese 2,500 years ago, said, when he was once asked by his students, he said something like this: if names are not right, what is said does not accord with the truth. When what is said does not accord with the truth, affairs cannot be carried on to success. When affairs cannot be carried on to success, reeds and music do not flourish. And when reeds and music do not flourish, law and justice will fail. And when the law and justice fail, the people do not know how to move hand or foot.
Slowly? Can you read it more slowly?
Now I give you the essence, because what he says, when they asked, what would you do when you were asked to lead the country? Then Confucius said, I would use the language properly. Because if I wouldn't use the language well, nobody would understand me, and it would become a mess. And so actually Confucius inspired me to make the name or the meaning of generativity right. Because when I started to do a pre-study and started reading about the few books in organization development that even mention generativity, there are famous writers, and David Cooperrider is one of them, and Gervais Bush is one of them. And so it is small, but it is big at the same time. When you really start reading this, then you say, wow, the one is telling this, the other is telling that. And they have contradictory meanings. This is actually saying, this is confusing me. So when you take all these books together, and I selected out of lots of possible books, I selected 27 publications, from books to Ph.D. research articles. And from those publications, I selected all the text elements that use the word generativity or generative. And this is actually 157 text, parts of text. So my data, this is academic language, my data consists of 157 pieces of text with somewhere the word generative in it. And then you can start your rigorous literature review. I take you to some steps briefly. First, about validity. Is it valid? So is my data, is it not biased? Are there some writers more dominant than others? Are they all like, they all like Appreciative Inquiry, so they all talk about generativity, things like that. It has to be a sort of an objective, representative set of data. So I did that, and it's fine. Then I looked at the way this text is used, because out of these 157, only 40 of those fragments really have the text set up like, to me, generativity means this and that. So it's like a definition. But there are other pieces of text that speak about a generative metaphor is this and this and that. a generative research is this and this and that. So generative is not directly used, but indirectly used. And then it's, we call it an adjective. And actually, you're not sure whether this gives the right information. Then it's even, I would say, worse. Some of those text fragments use generativity as a condition. So if generativity is in the air, then new ideas happen, or people get into action, or, you know, the light is suddenly shining, and this is generativity as a condition. But if I want to derive meaning from that, then I don't need only to know that when generativity is there, then the light goes on. I must know that when generativity is there, the light goes on, and when it's not there, the light doesn't go on. So we need to know whether there's a relationship between it. Okay, and then there's even a fourth category. If this and this and this happens, then we have generativity. So I'm still talking about these 157 text fragments. You could say, wow, this is now already one bunch of confusion. They speak against each other, and you can't find any red line in it or one sort of substance. And actually that is, of course, food for research. Because I don't need exact syntactical correctness. I can assume, and I won't elaborate on that, that all the writers may not have been aware of their type of writing, but they were writing about it. They used those words. So I could extract all these words out of these text fragments. And then I come to Wittgenstein, the great philosopher in language, and he says, we cannot talk about a system, we can only talk within a system. So, and until now, I was just looking at these text fragments, said something about it, this is adjective, this is a condition, this is that, but actually I have to step into my own data and start, it's like tasting the food. So I went a step deeper, level 2 of my research, and I went to these meanings of all these words. And I found out that some of these fragments speak about generativity as a quality of a thing. This is a generative painting. And this is a generative book. Another part of the text speaks about generativity of a person. Wow, that is a generative professor. That's a very generative manager. And actually, I think the latest book of Gervais Bush is titled The Generative Leader. In a moment, I will argue that you can't speak about a generative leader, but that the most of the text items, they address generativity as a quality of something, not a thing, not a human being, but something that is in between, something that happens, an interaction, and I would call that in general a process. Something that happens, an event. It's not, you can't grab it. You can only maybe record it like this webinar, but if you take a picture of it, then it's completely different than the complete recording. So in most of my cases, generativity is a quality of a process, of something that happens, and that's actually not just something that happens, because this word process is also for organization people, it's like, you know, it's a procedure, or that is a task or a job description. No, it is something that happens between persons or between a person and a painting. To give you an example, I'm looking at the beautiful painting. It could even be a Miriam Subirana, this painting, and this painting could give me ideas. Maybe the most generative of the process between me and the painting could be that I suddenly think I should become a painter myself. That would be a big effect of the painting of Miriam Subirana. But others may think, wow, this is great. and maybe it's a painting about nature, and people look at it and say, tomorrow we go into nature, then it brings to action. But at the same time, there can another person be looking at the painting, shrugs his shoulders and walks on. So and I did some study about it, we never can say this painting by Miriam Subirana is a generative painting. We can only say there can be something happening between me and that painting, and that could turn out to be generative, which is only to be measured or to be determined afterwards. The same reasoning is also for a person. I love Pep Buetas, and I think he can cause, because of his person and his language, he can cause change around in people to inspire. But how effective that may be, we can't call Pep Buetas a generative person, because there will be some people or some things or around that will not be affected. So maybe Pep is able, and the others of you also, when you're starting to try to influence the process of organization, that something happens, but you are not sure whether it always will happen. And you know, when you're a trainer or a consultant, a facilitator, you go to do the job, you have the right intention, but you will never be sure. Only afterwards, the people will say, wow, this was something. And then still you could ask, okay, was it something? And okay, and now we are 2 weeks further, and did also something happen or not? So, okay, speaking about generativity. We are in the description of what I did, because these examples, these came up in my head. So I'm talking to the data, and the data is talking to me. And because I stepped one step deeper, because so many of those text fragments refer to generativity as a quality of a process, I thought maybe, and this is what grounded theory suggests, the inductive way. It's like just, okay, what is the data telling me? I don't have a theory up front. Might there be something more to be seen in that 136 text fragments that all are talking about the process character of generativity? And yes, the longer I looked at it, I saw, wow, there are different manifestations. So some of these fragments, they just address the relational quality of a process. It's relational. So generativity as a process, as a relational process. But others really refer to change. So it's transformational. That's a little bit further. Then, even others, I come to 7 different manifestations of processual generativity. Some refer to disruption, sudden things that happen. Then there's future focus. Some of these processes are really have a generativity like in, whoa, there is a certain concern for the future, for next generations. All these 4 are still in the mind. You can see, it's built on text, and I derive those 4 qualities, but you don't see it happen. So number 5, actually, you see something happen because it gives ideas. So this is the moment that really people put post-its on the wall and say, whoa, this is a good idea, and this is, and sometimes, and that is sometimes the proof of generativity, if you ask, so whose idea was this? And then I don't know, it just was there. That is the idea giving level. But an idea on the wall, and every consultant knows this, is not an organizational change yet. So there's even another level of generativity that is really what I call actionable. Things really happen. It's like my looking at this painting of Miriam Subirana, and I'm not thinking, whoa, I'm going to make a picture of it, which is already quite something. But I start paint. I do something. I could also go and sell it, or go and find more paintings of Miriam Subirana or something like that. I take action. I really come into action. And that is peculiar because first we were talking or studying or reflecting, and then suddenly I come into action. That's level number 6. And level number 7 is what I suggested. I really start painting myself, the procreative. Something is happening beyond Miriam. Miriam was the painter of the painting of Miriam. Somebody else is looking at it and starts painting. That, I would say, that is a magnificent effect. And if leaders only would create leaders. But the thing is, leaders create followers. And that's a pity, I would say. Before the next gong, I was looking at these text fragments of authors, writers, scholars of these 27 publications. In all those text fragments, which is in their language, they refer to other sources, which were before them. So they refer to older sources, and I call them the ancestors. And I did a study to where their quotes came from. So they refer to Ken Gergen, who is speaking about generative research, or they were referring to Erik Erikson, a psychologist who first invented the word generativity, but it has to do with the stage of life. When you become 60, you start giving and you're becoming generative. Nothing to do with organizations, but they used these words and they quoted them, and sometimes they quoted them, I would say, a little bit fluffy. So, okay, I quote, maybe I do the same when I quote Confucius, and then Confucius says, this is not what I meant, dear case, but you know, he doesn't know. But some of those ancestors are still alive, so we have to be careful. And actually, I have to be careful for those 27 because they are all alive. This is what I did, and this is my quote to reflect on. It's a quote from Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he says, writing is nothing but the representation of speech. It is bizarre that one gives more care to the determining of the image than to the object. Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, why are we so focused on the writing where the speaking is so much more important, or at least as important as the writing? And when you speak, you taste the word, something happens. When you write, there's another way. So this is our 30 seconds of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, writing and speaking. And why do I have this quote? Because I was still looking to written text until now in my research. And I needed to take another step. And my professor thought, oh, this is okay, this is fine. You looked at the literature study, and now you have your 7 results, and that's it. So fine, go and write your results. And no. This is not it yet. We have to try and find out if I know now all these meanings, and you know, you can have a sort of an idea what has been said the most or not. I did an analytical reflection, which is, you could say, a sort of a language game with it. I started to think about, can we, and it's a little bit harsh maybe, or a little bit not so humble, to tell my readers, dear readers, having seen all this, I strongly suggest you to use generative in this way and not use it in that way. So please, don't speak of a generative metaphor anymore. Whoa. Don't speak of a generative leader, because maybe there are leaders that cause generativity, but don't call that person a generative leader. The next time maybe he shouts at his children to be quiet. So I give, and that's quite a part in my paper, that I play with the words, and there are some interesting examples, because just to give you an idea, someone produced a study on generativity. So it seemed, a scholar, I think that person even got a promotion for that. The first sentence of this article is, we're going to study generativity. The second sentence is, we define generativity as follows, and we call it productive. Here it comes. The whole study, all the tests, all the experiments are about, is this productive or not productive? And at the end of the paper, it says, oh, this was very productive, so this is very generative. This is crap. This was a study about productivity, not about generativity. So this is happening sometimes in the wordplay, like, I call that person a generative person in the sense of generous. My suggestion is, could we just call that a generous person then, and forget about generativity? Because generativity for a person, that is Erik Erikson, and that is someone in the 60s and he's doing something else. But at the same time, you can call some things generative, and you have, for example, a self-learning algorithm, a computer algorithm that is made to create new algorithms. Yes, you could call that generative, a generative algorithm. So this is the wordplay. This famous sentence of, which is very relevant and actual at the moment, I have a dream, Martin Luther King. This sentence, we still produce this sentence, I have a dream, but Martin Luther King doesn't do it. And it's not only that we reproduce this sentence, I think we really try to bring on the message that was in there. So it's not that Martin Luther King was a generative person, but this little sentence of him, I would call that a generative sentence. We could also think of Be the Change You Want to See in the World by Gandhi. So maybe slowly you get an idea from that part of my study where you can use the word generativity or should use the word generative, but also where you better not. Because if you think as a consultant that your PowerPoint presentation is very generative, then maybe you forget something about the objectives around your PowerPoint presentation, and you better try to find out, does this PowerPoint presentation contribute, hopefully, to something that afterwards may turn out to be a generative process? And how can I see that it turned out or not? Can you go into a process with that kind of intentions? So this is what I wrote at the end of, so I'm quoting myself, but I'm actually all the evening already quoting myself. At the end of this analytical reflection, and that ends my study. Because I'm suggesting a little bit of something that is maybe incorrect, but I still allow it. And it sounds like this. When you wish to express your sincere intention that an organization will unleash its best potential, hoping that over time it will show to be generative at the highest possible level, I encourage you to call that organization already generative in advance. It may not be yet, but call it like that. Pure intentionally as a performative way to positively influence the path to that organization's desired flourishing future. It's like telling your child that you are great, and then it becomes great. So here's a bit of appreciative inquiry already. Let's see the flourishing already, which is there. And I allow, me, Cees Hoogendijk, allows you to use the word like this. Okay, I'm not the owner of generativity, so I suggest this. This is what I did in my study, and now I come to results, but not for some moments to breathe.
It's almost 10 to 8.
Yes, I think I'm afraid I won't leave much time for questions. So I actually will be here for as long as you want me to have me here. I said I didn't do this so much before, so I need to find out how much time it costs. I will reach the end. If there are really questions, put them in the chat and I will come back to you. I will write you, mail to you, because it helps me. And maybe we can also go to until 8:05, but that's. I go into results and I start with a quote from Ken Gergen. And he says, in a sense, generative theorizing is a form of poetic activism. Poetic activism. That is, it asks us to take a risk with words, to shake up the conventions, to create new ways of understanding and new images of possibility. I love it to find a quote that helps me when I do something risky, because what emerged, and I made, you can believe, I made during this whole journey of my research, I made notes because I knew I had to make a sort of a diary. But what I can't find back in my diary is that at some day I came with the results, and the results are 5 words. 5 words that together form the elaboration of generativity. And these are the 5 words. 1, intentionality. 2, processuality. 3, performativity. 4, serendipity. 5, procreativity. And I come back to that. So just forget them for now. I need Fritjof Capra to explain what happens now. Capra says, emergence results in the creation of novelty. And this novelty is often qualitatively different from the phenomenon out of which it emerged. I need to explain you that there's something strange about emergence. And my best example is, can you imagine that one water molecule is not wet? But at some point, when you put a lot of water molecules together, they are called water, and that is wet. And we don't know where it happens. So this is also happening when we see individuals together, and we call them organization. They may all be healthy, but that doesn't mean that all healthy people together create something what we call a healthy organization. Sustainable people, not a sustainable organization. So this is really, we have to work on. So I had 2 years of looking at data. This was about 1.5 years. And then these 5 words come out of that data. So what do I have to do then as a scholar? I have to go back. I have to go back. You know about the word heuristics. Heuristics is what is your method? And heuristics has to do with Archimedes, who said, Eureka, I have it. So actually, so what happened is that serendipity overcame me. I gave these 5 words, and I made, and I did this recently, a retrospective analysis. Where did this come from to make it plausible? So my logical results to make it plausible. I'm not going to give you the details, but the end of this is that I have made an hypothesis. It's of course not a theory, it's an hypothetical theory. It's an assumption. The assumption is generativity consists of those 5 elements. And now I go into 5 factors for flourishing. I think we could call those 5 elements factors. They are all derived from the same source, generativity. They are intentionality, processuality. If you leave out one, you don't cover the whole. So factors are things you multiply with each other. So 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. But if there's 1 0 there, then the whole sum is 0. So all of those 5 are necessary to create to generate generativity? Just a short, if we take them one by one, what were we talking about? Intentionality. We talk about something in people or in organization that really presents the intention to go forward, to think of the future, to make something beautiful out of it. And if I would have more time, because what you don't know is that I'm actually a mathematician and a physician, and I studied quantum physics, and there's something very peculiar in the air. There actually in the whole space, there are a little bit more positive elements than negative elements. There seems to be a sort of intention of positivity. So it's not that I stand up and I have a good cup of coffee and I say, my intention for today is, no, that is my goal. So intentionality is really finding out, what are you here for as a consultant, as a manager? Can you find it as a quality of organization? Processual, process, so many used in organizations. A process, let's design a process. But that we're designing procedures to fulfill a task. What I talk about process, you have to go back to a brilliant person called Alfred North Whitehead, who talked about process in the terms of pantarei, everything flows. Organization is not a static thing. Organization is process. If you look at it, it changes already because you looked at it. And if you look 5 minutes later, it's already changed. So processuality is really the deep understanding that everything we do in organizations or with organizations is of a moving character. You can imagine we can go on for hours with this. Performativity, the third factor, is derived from a man called Austin who wrote the book How to Do Things with Words. And this is really playing with language, the art of language, to be aware that the words are coming out of my mouth, but they don't mean something to people. They can do, and they sometimes will do something with people. Actually, they do or they don't. And being aware of performativity is being aware of your potential art of language, and you can develop that into unlimited levels. Serendipity is coming from the word Serendip, the princess of Serendip, which is actually Sri Lanka or Ceylon. And serendipity, I think it's more common, you know, that is sort of this suddenly unexpected thing coming up which turns out to be valuable. You never thought of it. The post-it is one of the effects of serendipity, and maybe even my results are an effect of serendipity. But it's also, I just wrote it on because it came into my head that your next cup of tea coming from Ceylon is, of course, serendipity. This is also serendipity. So Miriam, did you ever see, you are a tea drinker, a brand called Serendipity?
No, no.
There must be, and if not, we have to register it by now because we have a fact. Okay. And pro-creativity, you know how many managers want to control things. And actually the measure is, if the change stops when you leave, then you're not pro-creative. Pro-creative means delegation, leaving it to the rest, to the next generation. If you go, the process will go on. So if we think that we are needed all the time as consultants or facilitators, then we are not pro-creative. We should be gone, and our client goes on. These are the 5 factors. It's still before 8. So 2 things to sort of finalize, because I found this. It has become a paper, and I can defend this paper in the Academy of Management. So that is a product. I'm writing a journal article, and its journal article is getting much better than this paper. It's richer. Fine. That's only step 1. Step 2 is the question, how can we bring generativity into practice? If people say, I want to become, I want to learn how to be, or something like that, then the next research is really, what are we talking about? Is generativity a human quality? Are these 5 factors human qualities? Even competences? Tricky words, eh? That's typical human resource management stuff. Let's design competences. Or is it actually an organizational indicator? Could you see it on the dashboard? What about our intentionality in the organization? The processuality, the performativity? I think you can say something about it, but I think it's all. And in this, asking myself, I don't want to give it a name yet. And that's why I'm not speaking of intention or intentional, but I'm thinking of the phenomena of intentionality. And there came a Finnish person called Esko Kilpi, and he says, people are simultaneously forming and being formed by each other at the same time, all the time. And he says, what we used to call competences, we should skip that. We should go into a new word called agency. Agency, something that moves, and the best definition I got, it's an interactive group competency. So maybe the ideal would be that those 5 factors are becoming the qualities of a group that is working on them. So that is my next step. How can we bring this? Because it won't be a course, a 2-day training, a masterclass. I don't know. We have to find out, and that's my next step. I'm going to finish. And now you really have, and I think I asked Miriam to put in 2 words, endnote and endnote. And look at the chat. Endnote and the word endnote. The only thing is that if you look at it, the first word is written with an E and the other with an A. It's a part of my serendipity because this also just came up yesterday. What does this mean? If we speak, we hear the same, endnote. End is ending, end is further. So it's in the same word. To the word generativity with an E is either a biological thing. People are generative, especially the women, because they give birth. You give life. So from a biological perspective, we are generative. So it's a pleonasm. It's either psychological, then we come to this Erikson. So, and since an organization is not a biological thing, it's a social construct. It consists of what people are talking to each other. It consists of narratives. One little sidestep. There's another very brilliant philosopher, it's called Jacques Derrida, who made already this kind of a trick. If somebody heard of the word, and it's a French word, différence, which means difference. Différence. And you should also type it in the chat, because you write différence in French with an E, différence. And he thought of the concept of différence next to différence with an A. And what he wanted to say by this is that we always need context around our words, around our language, to understand language. He made that clear. And I think I must have been sleeping, but it actually happened under the shower, and there was the princess of serendipity again. And suddenly I saw the word generative with an A. So that means that we can now really, if the academic world will accept this, they won't, because they don't like new language. That's silly, of course, but okay. That we can speak of a generative consultant with an A, because that is a quality we can really give, because it's a new word. We are not bound anymore. And this is actually where I am now, from generativity to generativity. And we need the chat box to find out the difference. And the difference, la différence, with an E or an A. And this is actually part of my end note with an E or an A. Thank you very much for
Cees.
staying here.
Thank you, Cees. So, and thank you everyone.